one and I stand on that. You and me, babe, that's black on black.
I thought it would be a nice time to bring back a genealogist. She is a pro genealogist. I think that's the professional genealogist. And last time she was here, she was like opened up a whole the world of possibilities. I was like, you got to come back and come back frequently. Let me welcome the one and only Nicka Smith to the Karen Hunter Show. Hello, welcome back.
Thank you, and happy holiday weekend to you. Have you started cooking? Or are you going somewhere?
All of that and none of that at the same time. Yeah, I probably will be doing something, but for me, I was sharing with the audience, the holidays are a little different. When you lose, part of the anchor of your life, it's like, this becomes almost sad, because it's like, who's carving the turkey? It's like it's a different mind frame. So I'm just kind of like, we're forced into these holidays, and then you have to process them and then grieve all over again. It's just a lot. So I'm just like, man, I'm gonna do some self-care this week.
Yeah, well, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. And in some ways, sometimes the heir apparent is the reluctant heir apparent, and you see the folks sort of rising up. You know what I mean? Like there potentially is someone to carve the turkey, but you don't want to because you love to sit back and watch him do it, or you like to sit back and watch her do it, or I don't want to be the one that sits at the table and listens, but you still always find yourself being that person that does that. And then when they're no longer there, you're like, oh gosh, now it's me. So there's a grief of they're no longer there, but then there's also an ascension that takes place at the same time where you recognize that you're now that person.
Okay, Nicka. All right. Well, thank you somebody need to hear that today. And for us here on this amazing platform, which I do believe we created a family environment where we all disagree, argue, fuss, and fight, all of those things, but at the end of the day, we're on the same page in terms of the due north and where we're headed collectively and together. It's important for us to always do that Sankofa thing and reach back. For those of us who are African American, born, here in these shores, it's harder for us to make those connections. And I've done the African ancestry with Gina Page, and I know that I'm from the Temne tribe, and also I have some original Liberian ancestry as well as Sierra Leone. And it's good to know, and I probably will visit those places, but my roots are really here, forged in the soil of South Carolina, Charleston and Columbia, and I know that means something, right? So how do we start to put the pieces together and take it all the way back?
Well, it really starts with listening. A lot of times when families gather for family reunions and other things, folks are telling stories. They're talking about the elders, people they remember, churches they went to, the cemeteries they were buried in. We're constantly getting these details, but in the back of our minds, just like how we always expected that person to be there to carve the turkey, or we always expected the person to be there to deliver that dressing or that pound cake, those people aren't going to stay around forever. And so one day somebody's got to stand next to that person who's carving the turkey and see exactly how they did it, or stand next to the woman making that sweet potato pie to learn how she puts her particular spin, or how, or even the men. There are men in my family that make better sweet potato pies than the women do, but somebody's gotta ascend to that position, and we can't squander the opportunities. And the holidays are a perfect time. One of the things I love to do in my family is like toss out just a question, because one singular question can elicit 3 or 4 different responses. Like, what happened when Big Mama died, right? Think about that from the vantage point of the movie Soul Food, right? Holiday movie, the young boy is going to have one perspective versus Terry, who's going to have a different perspective, versus Mac, like you literally look at everyone and they're going to answer that question differently. And that's the value of having family together for me, because I want to know the truth is somewhere between all those stories. And then what the documents say, sometimes it aligns perfectly, and then sometimes it's a little bit different, because everyone's thought process and how they process things is just, they just show up differently. So sit around and listen. The other thing is, we neglect what we have in our possession in our homes so much. And I often tell people that your house is the institutional archive of your family, whether it's photos, whether it's birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, deeds, wills, tax statements, pretty much anything can be of genealogical value. And when we surpass that, or even the homes of our relatives, you know, the aunt that has all the photos, or like my grandmother, who was the one that kept all the funeral programs, those are rich. And especially in the case of funeral programs, that was one of the only ways that Black people could reflect to the world who they were in their words. And sometimes you cannot find those details in publicly available documents.
866-801-8255. I forgot who asked us to do this, but I did it, you know, where you sit and you go, I'm Karen, daughter of Margie, daughter of Julia, daughter of, you know, you go all the way back as far as you can go. And I had my mother go back as far as she could go so I could add to it. And we then landed on her great grandmother, who I know was on a plantation, who was enslaved. And my mother stayed with her when she was a little girl. And it was the first time I ever heard these stories. And I was like, you know, that was the big house up, the house up, that was the big house. And your mother, your great grandmother, was literally on a plantation because her grandmother died in childbirth, right? My mother's grandmother. So her great grandmother took the kids in the summertime when they would come visit. But is that a simple thing that we can do, is just get our parents to go back as far as they can?
Absolutely. You know, when you're at the table, you know, talking over the dressing, you know, if you, like my family in Louisiana, somebody's making gumbo, you know, whatever you're talking over, you know, either write notes down or sit your phone down. We have voice recorders now. And one of the things that I'm so glad that I did when I first really got into genealogy is I recorded the elders. And if it wasn't my notes that I wrote down, I literally sat a recorder down and I talked to them and I asked them questions. And the one thing about interviews, and I think you know this, again, this is the second time I've been in this space, is you get what you get for that moment. But then when you come back later, there's another layer that you didn't talk about or you didn't think about the previous time. So don't ever think about it as, I'm going to interview my mama once. Like, no, I've been in this forever. I still find out new stuff from my mama. And I'm like, you never told me that. And she said, yes, I did. And then we argue back and forth as to whether or not she did. So it's not only just your blood relations, but it's fictive kin. People who have been close to your family, your neighbors, your mama's best friend, your auntie's best friend, your grandma's best friend, those folks that have been watching, you know, from a third person point of view, who, you know, if you're trying to find out things like potentially who's my grandfather, or maybe who's my dad, or who's my mama, that individual might have that answer and they may be able to give it without the baggage that comes along with being related. So yes, you're going to rack your mind, family members' minds, ask those questions, go through, you know, the homes, your own home, relatives' homes, and then you want to be deliberate about documenting it, because we are a people who has oral tradition. And while that is still important and is still valuable, we also want to make sure that because we have the ability to read and write and synthesize information, and we have access to documents, that we are intentional about documenting these things, whether they are in digital form or whether they are in printed form as well.
One of the commitments that I've had to do in the last, you know, decade or so was to figure out how I could help people tell their own stories. I you know, all these memoirs out here, there ain't nobody asked for, but in our you
over here tap dancing on a nerve, because I constantly ask people this. People go, well, I know what. No, will you stop thinking no one wants to hear your story? Because if we operate like that, while we have resources and tools that folks have never had, think about all the voices of the formerly enslaved we could be hearing from right now if somebody didn't say that story was not important. Right? We only have a tiny amount. And then when you move to the next generation, people who, you know, survived Reconstruction, folks in the early 20th century, hardly anybody has ever gone and asked Black people what they thought, what they felt, what their life was like, a first person perspective. And here we are, before we even put the recorder out. Don't nobody want to hear from me. Come on now. Come on.
Yes. I watched the Zora Neale Hurston documentary, and she's one of these people who had an unmarked grave that the world forgot about. If not for Alice Walker and some others, we probably wouldn't be erecting the name of Zora Neale Hurston, who was one of the most important documentarians, one of the most important cultural anthropologists of any time. But when she talked to Black people, they had sent people out to talk to Black people after enslavement, but they sent white people into these places, and Black people ain't gonna talk to white people right out of slavery the way they would talk to a sister like Zora Neale Hurston. It was a completely different experience when you saw her with her recorder that she got from the good white lady who was holding her hostage on so many levels. But she got that recorder and filmed Black people being regular ass Black people with another person that they felt comfortable with. And it was such a different experience, which is why we have to tell our own stories, because if Ken Burns is doing it, it ain't gonna be true. Not true.
I mean, and there's a certain thing about it as well, because Zora Neale Hurston was considered an orthodox in her field at the time, right? Like her methods, they just go against the academy, and that's one of the things in some ways like that I like about academia, but that I don't like about academia is like this. There's like these unwritten rules, like you can't be a part of whatever you're studying, right? Because then you are biased. But no one ever made that judgment about folks who have been writing about Black people and people of color and marginalized groups for a long periods of time. Like no one ever said to them, their vantage point and their view was biased, right? So then the people who are part of the group cannot write and cannot articulate about themselves because that's considered bias. So it's like, which way? I don't understand. This is like a paradox. It's weird. I don't get it. So yes, be empowered, because as much as we walk around with these phones and these images and these videos, we're documenting ourselves, but we got to be more intentional about how we're doing it. And in some ways, again, it's just basic questions like, it's simple things that we don't even necessarily think about. Like, I remember when the 1950 census came out, and I talked to my mom, and I just was asking her about the people in the building with them on the south side of Chicago. And my mom was telling me stories about every single person. And she hadn't thought about these people in years. And it was literally just because she said, well, who else is in the building? And I was like, oh, okay, you told me this family, right? Like I knew to look for them. And then she told me about the lady that had all of her babies in the building and how I used to scare the kids because she wouldn't go to the hospital. But like, think about this. She's from the country, likely Mississippi, because it's Chicago. And she wouldn't used to no hospital. So she would have, I said, well, how many kids does she have? My mom said she had like 6 kids. And she would get to hollering, and all of the little kids in the building would be scared because she wouldn't go to the hospital to have her babies. I had never heard this story in my life, but one document triggered my mom's thoughts like that.
See?
So sometimes it's just that simple.
Nicka, this is I think it's God's work as we put together the tapestry of humanity, one story at a time, because we matter, right? And nobody else gets to tell our story, or should, right? And I think about all of the people who have died with so much gold left in their memories that we will never extract because it's in the grave. This is our time to go excavating all of the stories, because these people, when we erect them, their lives continue, right? This is how we keep people alive, by saying their name. 866-801-8255. We're talking with Nicka Smith, who is nickasmith.com, Nicka, who is nickasmith.com. And you can go to Neek, Neek Smith, at Neek Smith on the threads and the Instagram to follow her. She's also, I think, on Twitter, but we don't care about them. We are here. And I thank you for the work. I thank you for the conversation around the work as well, because I think we don't talk enough, because to that point, we've been made to believe that our stories aren't valuable unless a white person tells it, So I think about the Henrietta Lacks story told through, and I appreciate Rachel Sloot, or whatever her name is.
Rebecca
God bless
Sloot,
you for Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca Sloot. I'm really horrible with names, but I got to get better. But I think about thanking her for telling that story, but how much more didn't we know, as a result of the missing pieces of that story? The core of that is important. Her cells, we need to know, but there's so much more to Henrietta Lacks, I believe. So there's that. Let's take a call or two. 866-801-8255. Nicka Smith is here. LeVar in Dallas, Texas. You're on. Welcome.
Hey, welcome. Appreciate you answering my call. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Hi.
Hey, this is my second time calling. I've been listening to your show forever, and I appreciate everything you do. And then for this conversation, this is a very important conversation to me and very dear to my heart. So I had a question, but I actually had two, but I wanted to kind of give a short story. So when it comes to genealogy, um, thankfully my mother, she had my grandmother's Bible, which had lineage of like our ancestors when it comes to my mother's side. So it went to my grandmother, my great grandmother, and then my granddad and his dad, and then a few other people down the line. So what I did was went to the library in Dallas, Texas, and it's a pretty big genealogy library, and I did the research. And I got, ancestors that came from Mississippi, ancestors that came from Alabama, and then as I went down to like 1800, 1850, 59, 56ish, around that area, even lead back to North Carolina. And then I did the ancestral blood test on ancestral.com, and it said that most of my ancestors came from West Africa. Many countries in Africa, Nigeria, you got Ivory Coast, a few other places on West Africa, and they was on a ship, and the ship landed in North Carolina. So it was cool to see that connection by blood test and then genealogy. But one of my questions is, I got stuck in the 1850s, 1856, and as slavery got freed, and a lot of things within that, we don't see, records. You want to see numbers, and I know I need to go to these states and probably get, like North Carolina, maybe Alabama, even Mississippi, get a hold of somebody, or even go to these libraries to get even more deeper into records. But me in Dallas, Texas, it's kind of hard to get that, so I kind of hit a brick wall. So I was just asking, y'all kind of, advice I can give on that.
Okay, well, yours conundrum is not one that's not uncommon. Many of us who have enslaved ancestors in the United States, we can get back to about 1870 or 1865, really, because 1870 is the first census that Black folks, regardless, their status, if you were free before 1870, you're going to be on the U.S. Census by name. But if you were enslaved, you're not. And so people run into this brick wall because they're like, well, how do I find people before 1870? Really, the sweet spot is between 1869 and 1865. That's the important spot, because you're finding your folks emerging from the system of enslavement. They may have a completely different last name. They may be in a different county. If you're talking people based in Texas, you have to remember, when did Texas become a state? Technically, it's newish, which means that you have to bring people from other places to make and create Texas. So when you're telling me Mississippi, that tracks. When you're saying Mississippi, slaveholders left Mississippi during the Civil War and took their enslaved to Texas because they thought that Texas was going to remain a slave state. So that's not shocking to me. People being born in North Carolina, then sent to another deep South state, and then ending up in Texas, that's not uncommon. And so what you're looking for not just looking at surnames of some of the more wealthy white families in the same county, but what you're looking for are connections, again, in that 1865 to 1870 time span. Looking at records like the Freedmen's Bureau, can you find your ancestors listed on labor contracts where they're no longer formally enslaved, but now they're being paid for their labor by a landowner who could have been their slaveholder? Are you finding ancestors that were involved in the Civil War? You have over 180,000 Black men who were in the U.S. colored troops. Did they apply for a pension through the Department of, the VA? And can you order their pension where they mention who their slaveholder is? You're looking at Texas. If you're talking East Texas, there may be a connection to the 5 tribes. Was someone in your family sold there, or did they migrate to Eastern Texas during the Civil War because there were, Civil War battles in the Indian Territory? You haven't run out of options. Basically, that's what I'm telling you, is that it's not over. Before you hop on a plane and just go to the proverbial North Carolina without a county, we need to know which county they came from. So start local, find the records that you can find between 1860, really 1865 and 1870. Track your ancestors down, male ancestors. Did they vote? Did they register to vote in 1867? How long did it say that they lived in the state of Texas at that time? Were they paying property taxes, or are they on the agricultural taxes? Look at deed records at the county that they're documented in Texas. Who were they buying and selling land and cattle and other stuff from? Because that likely indicates a relationship prior to slavery ending, and that may be your lead.
It's like you have to be a detective. And thank you,
Oh,
LeVar.
honey, yes. I call it crime scene.
Crime scene is CSI, the Black version, the CSI. Yes, I love it. I love what you do, Nicka. I was talking to you off mic because you have a post from Keisha Blaine about the newly opened African American Museum in Charleston. And I just think about the alignment of my life right now, right? From the Black on Black with Dr. Daniel Black. And it's just like there's a lot of things. But we're going to be in Charleston in Kiowa in January for Healthy, Wealthy, Wise. And when I went there on a site visit, I found this African American museum and this oak tree, and I was like, can we add that to the mix of things? And I didn't know how powerful this museum was. And you posted it. Talk a little bit about the importance of, and I was confused because it's international, which lets me believe it's global, African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. Stuff doesn't seem to make sense, but make it make sense.
Right. So International African American Museum is open since the pandemic, incredible site. And in addition to telling the story of the importation of Black people into the United States, the museum is actually at the site that the boats would literally disembark enslaved Africans. That's where the site of the museum is. And then in addition to that, you can go through the experience of learning about enslavement within the United States. In particular, there's portions about South Carolina. They have a family history center in the museum. So if you want to start working on your family history, you can go there. They have volunteers. They even have programming online where they host speakers to come in and teach about various aspects of genealogy. I've been there. Several of my good friends have been there. I know several people who work with the founding director of the Center of Family History. So it's an incredible resource. So if you end up going to Charleston, please make sure you make it your business to get to the museum. And if you haven't started your family history, that's a great way to connect with the Center for Family History there.
So you just go there and you type in your family's last name, because my people are from Charleston, from Somerville, actually. Right. So they should have a record of it.
They have computers, they have subscriptions, they have staff there to help you. And I think especially with your retreat, that will be a great hands-on experience for the folks who were there. Because I can guarantee you, anytime I've worked with a group of folks like what you're commandeering, there's going to be at least 4 or 5 people in there who said that they wanted to do this, but they never had the time. And so now that you're kind of like corralling them into this space and having them being intentional and sitting down, they're going to get bit, and I'll probably see them around someplace.
Okay, you giving me. I'm gonna have to invite, because we have to do a second leg because we have a 500 person waiting list. So we're gonna do a second leg of this. I'm gonna center this because this was gonna like an add-on. This was an add-on. Since we're here,
right? If
you're gonna be here, how many people want to go? Not everybody signed up. It's too late now because we got. But I'm just sitting there like this. What this thing could do that? This is going to be powerful.
It can. And the other piece of this as well is, that was one of the largest importation places in the United States was in Charleston. It's there. You have to think about New Orleans at one point was the largest slave port in the United States, but not even the United States, North America. But nobody knows that because, again, there's no museum along the Mississippi River that tells you, hey, guys, this is where all this happened. Same thing in Charleston. You had to have someone call it out, and mark it to show the impact. And we're walking around so much of this stuff all the time, and we don't even know.
Take it for granted. It's right in front of your face. Melissa and Marilyn, we have a few minutes left. You're on the Karen Hunter Show. Nicka Smith is here. Hi, Melissa.
Yes. Longtime listener, big fan. I just wanted to mention about the brother who said he hit the brick wall and looking in North Carolina. So my relatives are from North Carolina. North Carolina has digitized many of their records of enslaved Africans prior to 1865. And so even though he's in Dallas, Texas, he can go online to the North Carolina Slave Deeds Project. I was able to find my 3 times great-grandmother that way. And I wrote an article about it called Finding My African American Eve. It's on zora.medium.com if you want to get more details about how I did that.
That's a great call out. That and the system that you're talking about is run by the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. It's part of it is the slave deeds that they have in North Carolina, but they also have court cases that mention enslaved people that's a resource for like the Deep South. It's not just North Carolina, but the challenge is for those of us that have Deep South roots, like we end up in Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas. We just have a state. We don't even have a county to look for. So that makes it a challenge because how many Davids are you going to find? How many Johns are you going to find? But you're not sure if it's your John or your David. So you have to roll back before you jump to go, same thing with DNA testing, right? Yes, we love it. We want to make the jump to Africa, but we got to find out who's on the ship. And in order for us to find out who's on the ship, we got to come back to the United States, and not just the United States. We're going to go back to the county where the people live so that we can find the connections and the cookie crumbs in order for us to get to North Carolina.
Yes, it's work, but it's worth it. It's worth it because the more we put together our story, the more solid we are in our lives and our bodies. Nicka, the work you're doing is God's work. What about the Latter-day Saints? Those Mormons keep records. Those Mormons keep records. I was talking with Dr. Carr about that. I was like, what? Like they're great genealogists. Is that a source for folks?
Yes. So FamilySearch.org is a website that is run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, as people know. They began preserving records on microfilm in the 1930s. And they went around the world. It wasn't just in the United States, because it's a part of Mormonism is to research your ancestors. And then there's like certain aspects of the religion where you have to know who your ancestors are in order for you to proceed with that particular thing. And so a lot of what fuels genealogy websites in terms of images comes from the Mormon Church. And so you do have access to it there. You do have access to Ancestry as well. If it's cost prohibitive to have a subscription, library systems have it, your colleges have it. The thing is, we are going to go anywhere where the records are. Do not feel like you have to stay on one site or the other. Just like the caller just mentioned, the resource from University of North Carolina, Greensboro, you're going to find Lexington, Kentucky, or Louisville, Kentucky. They just digitized records for the enslaved there. You're going to find even things like Historic New Orleans Collection, where they have a collection of newspaper ads, people trying to find their family after slavery ended. I mean, go wherever the records are. That's my point.
I'm going to have you back. Will you keep coming back, Nicka? Because I think we got to keep having this conversation. We got to keep putting this together. Maybe we'll do a workshop next time you're here. Thank you so much for coming through.